Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday. This is DebateSensei. We have Tim Seavey from San Diego State University.
What's up?
I'm Jared Kubika Miller. I'm the debate coach, professor of communications. Matt is out trying out for Jeopardy, New Zealand, actually. So it's a niche. You know what I mean? It's like people haven't exploited it yet. So he found that. Okay.
What is with him?
Yeah. So we're talking about prep time, and prep time is it means different things. You know, like I think most people think about prep time like during debate rounds, and so I want to talk about setting up for like I also want to talk about prep time before the rounds, but during the rounds there's usually time that is set aside for people to, just take a little bit, a moment to collect their thoughts, take some notes, find some research, put things together before they come up and speak. I know for like NFALD, they have like 4 minutes that they could use for their own whatever, right? And for policy, they have their own, yeah. And so, but for okay, I want to talk just a little bit before we get into it about like what your thoughts are on flex time in Parley.
These new kids, right? I don't know how spoiled they are. Back in our day, we didn't have flex time. We just answered the questions. So what you're talking about, flex or flex prep, as some people call it, is this addition to parliamentary debate where it didn't used to be this way, but it's both like time to prepare your statements as well as ask questions. So previously it was interruption. So pointed information was kind of this strategic tool that still exists. You can still do it, but I think no one really does it anymore because it can just be answered like, oh, I'll get you in flex time.
Yeah, I hear that all the time.
Information or like strategic questions or just points of like your clarifying questions, like, oh, what was the tagline you had for your DA there or whatever, that the person who's not speaking can ask of the speaker or, typically cross team. And now that has its own kind of dedicated time. And so in between speeches, speakers have the ability to like take some quick notes, organize their thoughts, where they're going to go, and also ask questions of the other team. So in that time, it's kind of a useful dual purpose. I think it's cool. I think like it makes it a little bit easier. And I wish that I'd had it, right? Like I wish that was a thing back in the day to be able to plan out the directions you're going to go, because sometimes that's tricky. You're like, I think, honestly, everyone would just really extend their brief off-time roadmap, and that would functionally be their, like, prep. That would be like, okay, I'm going to go first to the top of case, to the top of calorie. No, okay, hold on, wait. Okay, first the DA, and, like, that became his organization. It would not be his hell for everyone to watch. So I see why Flex does a better job of that.
I remember one time when I was competing, I think Long Beach held a tournament and they did like cross-examination instead of points of information for Parley. And that almost felt like we had some extra prep time. Right. So I remember that felt kind of awesome when it happened. But I like the cross-X was the best part. It wasn't necessarily the prep time. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just want to know. Well, what do you think though? Like it's a pretty recent development in Parley.
Yeah, and I think that to be honest, I've only seen it on the West Coast. I haven't seen a ton of debate elsewhere, but it may be that we just adopted it, or it may be that it's kind of starting to move around. But I think having prep time in debates is useful, if nothing else, because it takes a little bit of that communication apprehension away. Like you've got a second to breathe and figure out the next piece. And also I like that at least for, LD and for policy and for public forum, you have the ability to break that up. So you can be strategic with your prep time and like use 30 seconds at a time before each speech, or save it all until like the final rebuttals. So I think there are different strategies that one can employ with prep time, but I would usually encourage my students to use for those more prepared debates that are not limited prep debates, recommend to use a little bit before each speech, even if you think you don't need it, just to make sure that you know the direction that you're going in. Don't use your roadmap as your time to organize and plan your thoughts. I think prep time can be valuable if nothing else, also for partners to communicate and get that little bit of communication back and forth that previously partner to partner communication was a major or a more significant issue, I think. In Parley, like you'd have some judges that really didn't like partner communication because it can become this parroting thing where like one person doesn't really know what the argument is and the other person just says it to them and then the speaker says it. It's like, why are we even having this discussion? So I think prep time does give an opportunity for partners to collaborate for a quick second, kind of do a little mind share before delivering the speech. So I think it just makes speeches more polished and a little bit more persuasive. And I like that element to it, and I think it can be used well.
All right, let's jump into it. Like, what do we do about prep time, and specifically like for online environments, right? Like, I mean, there are some basic. We should go over some basics, but I'm really interested in how online tournaments and practices affect how you use prep time and how prep time changes because of it.
Yeah.
Like
so
one thing I was thinking is, go for it.
I think the rules still state across all forms of debate that during prep time, now not talking about like parliamentary debate where it's like 15 to 20 minute prep before the round, talking like once you are in round and you have flex prep or you're in LD public forum or policy and you have like your actual prep time, I believe the rules still say that you're not supposed to use the internet during the round. Now, that point was brought up to me recently that NFALD, you are allowed to like Google things in the middle of the round. Like there was not an NFA rule against using the internet, but I think that you would be maybe a little bit hard pressed to like find a judge that feels totally comfortable with like, yeah, sure, Google whatever. But then again, we are in weird times and maybe that's just now the standard. Like maybe evidence like that can, like, it's no longer just contingent right on like what cards you cut before the tournament. Like, hell, everything's online. If you have access to the information, like, bring it up.
Yeah.
And I think that may be a new addition that tournaments may be more lax with because there's like basically no way to enforce it. Like if two people are in different places and they're debating online, how do you know if someone's typing it onto a document versus typing into Google?
Well, it's also kind of an artificial rule in the real world, right? Like if you have access to a computer and somebody asks you a question, that's what you're going to do. So it seems like, we're trying to adapt, traditional rules of debate for the sake of tradition. And we should really be thinking about how the technology will affect debate and instead of going, it's like, well, how can we make it as resemble debate as closely as possible as we know it? And instead say, what is best practices? They say, what are the best practices with this technology? So like if we had that approach, rather than let's just try to electronically replicate what we've been doing. I don't know. I'm kind of in favor of that approach.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it's an opportunity, if nothing else, just for some experimentation. Like there could be some really good stuff that comes away from doing entirely online debates, including like just the use of internet. If that gets people really good and quick at doing research, like I don't think that there's honestly a downside to that besides just it breaks the old school rules. So I think you're right. I think that's just like holding on to it for the sake of tradition, and there could be some good stuff that comes out of it. So when you are, prepping someone or you're instructing a student to go off and like, knock out your LD case, do you have any recommendations for how they use their prep time? Is it just like organizing stuff, or is it, researching cards, or now I guess Googling? Like, can you think of ways that you advise students to use prep?
Well, the actual prep time, I would be okay. So you have to set yourself up, right? You can't just you can't have like really crappy, like evidence files and then just expect to it's kind of like, oh, as long as I use my 4 minutes effectively, I should be just fine. It's like your 4 minutes are only as good as your preparation leading up to that moment. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that the best thing that people ought to do is not just have a bunch of cards, but I really think that they ought to start mapping out the entire debates more, right? The way that we format cards is great, but again, that was derived from paper methods that we're just trying to adapt to electronic tools, right? And so I would suggest doing something a little bit more like this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really want somebody to, so this is like from a couple years ago, well, like 4 years ago, the Latin America topic. And so this is like, this is just part of an overall map about what's going to happen. Here's like different plan texts, and here's different advantages, got different backgrounds and stuff like that. And so you, and in the details, you can have extra information as well, and sources. All right.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, it's so this is debategraph.org. I really encourage people to use it. And so the point is that in your 4 minutes that you got, if you have things mapped out, you're like, oh, okay, they went with for the U.S. Southern Command one, they went with the second argument here, and so what are my responses that I have prepared already?
Oh,
you know
nice.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And so so that would be a great way. And so as they're going along, you could start adding to the to the map, and it doesn't take long after you've already created like the infrastructure to modify it. And then maybe you do need to Google something. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, but you've at least got your notes really well formatted ahead of time, so you're not just relying on like traditional card indexes to figure out where you need to go. You know likely what each branch of the debate is going to drive. I love that. That's a really cool model. So that's for the pre-prepped, right? So I know we've talked previously about, how to research for an event, how to start looking into a topic, or how to start organizing your case. I think when talking about prep time for public forum, Lincoln Douglas, policy, when you have, functionally infinite prep, do you find it usually useful to like build a case all the way through and then just start coming up with negatives? With like very disadvantaged to your own case. So like you're pre-planning what responses will be, and then you can also use those. Is that like your format?
Yeah, I mean, as much as possible, you find the affirmative that you like the best. I do think that I don't know. I am also in favor of having a second affirmative in your pocket, for like an out round, or throwing a curveball. You might even have one for a specific judge. So like that's always good, you know what I mean? But you always just bang out one of those affirmatives. So I think the first time you might be faced with prep time would be the negative constructive, right? And so how do you deal with that? Somebody who comes out with a case that you have nothing to say about it. What are you doing? Right? So first off, but the research end of it, you really should have come up with some very, very broad strategies. Okay, so like like really big picture, philosophical, critical arguments, disadvantages that have, really sort of easy link stories to a bunch of different possibilities, things like that.
Sure.
What you're doing is you're kind of scouring the evidence that they're submitting for a link, is what you're doing. You know what I mean? And you're trying to kind of say, there it is. And so you do, I mean, it still relies on really good strategy beforehand, right? You have to be able to prepare that stuff ahead of time and see it coming. But when it happens, you have to be able to kind of pick it out of the evidence that they should have given you or posted before the round or during the round.
Yeah.
So you're just scouring.
Yeah. And that's where like debate drops and like files that are really like the modern day standard in LD, where people just post their evidence like, all right, this is the beginning of the round, here it is. And then functionally like the 1AC is just reading what everyone else is, or, the speaker reciting very quickly what everyone else is already reading through and like prepping for. So it almost makes the 1AC, I don't want to say completely like unimportant, but everyone knows what is said there. So it becomes a much more like text focused debate that I think that is, all prep time basically for the neg to just start going nuts on that file to be able to get the details through. I think that being able to really quickly and effectively with something like Debategraph pull through like, okay, great. I know immediately like this is generally what the case is about. Here's a couple arguments, and then, planning negative strategies around that. I think that's worth like I think you have to do a lot broader research in planning out negative strategies, just because you have no idea what you're going to hit. Like, you can have some base ideas, but you just need to have really broad arguments and then organize it based on how you can link those things. When you're talking about a limited prep type of debate, and I think this is where, a lot of folks are thinking, like, prep time in a lot of spheres is like, we're talking about parliamentary debate, 15 to 20 minutes of prep immediately before the round starts. So you have the topic and now you have to prepare a case. So in the past, like we've discussed, case construction or that kind of prep, that is going to be very different with online debate. Still similar in that, like, you have to go through the same processes to build a case and plan out your arguments and know the format and things like that. So that's all, the fundamentals remain the same, but the ways that teams interact. So it's become a much more team-driven prep time, in the last probably 5-10 years, where it's largely like coaches will break up and discuss with teams, like, all right, divide the room in half of, this is the affirmative, this is the negative side. And now, like, each coach preps each team or whatever, things like that. And that's obviously become trickier. So some of the tools, I know at SDSU, we did just like a Google chat where we created chats with the coaches and each team, or for IPDA as well. There's another limited prep debate event, just created individual chats. So in those, IM chats, you can just start throwing in evidence, like get the topic from the student and start throwing in evidence. That's one way. Or using Discord. I know that some schools are using Slack, just some kind of instant messenger group type platform, so that you can shoot off messages between a group and kind of crowdsource the research phase of it, especially if you don't already really deeply know a subject. So when you get, like, very policy specific resolutions, how would you run, even just at a literal level, like, how is STC doing prep time for parliamentary debate in an online space?
Well, we'll see is the short answer. I think one thing that I like doing is the possibility of maybe just doing a Google Doc, you know what I mean? Sure. And like writing stuff up there, and because then you can kind of go back and modify. If you have a scrolling text, that you might bury really good arguments in it. I think that you kind of want to develop it and be able to see it. And so, like, bullet pointing things out is really important. I'm leaning towards like a Google document, or again, Debategraph is another good one, because that also gets updated in real time, and you can just you can put evidence there. And the thing is, like, that kind of stays around for a while. So if you come back to a similar topic later on, you just pull up the map again and develop it even more.
That's super useful. Yeah. And that's going to be interesting, I think, because a lot of topics are recycled, right? Like, immigration is going to change its shape and form, but it's going to come up a lot. Like, we're going to discuss it a lot. Or, anything like South China Sea is going to constantly come up, or, there's all kinds of policies that are regular topics that just, you can expect it about any tournament. And sure, you'll get some curveballs every now and then, but I think that's where you can definitely save at least, like, effective cases generally, and then be able to just update it with new evidence. So it seems to me like Debategraph, there's a little bit of a learning curve for that. So, like, to be able to write in real time in Debategraph as effectively as Google Docs, maybe, like, you need a little bit more practice there, but it seems like you can still do much of the same stuff with it. Like, it's just another mechanism for organizing, probably more organized than a Google Doc.
It definitely favors, like, larger teams, I think. I do think that, because they'd be able to each take their own section of a map and develop it out. And so if it was just like one coach and one student, less effective, but still probably better than, just hopping on the phone and talking. It's just, it really does help maintain the sort of organization of the arguments, right? And see the relationship of connections. And that's really important. You don't always see that in a document format, or just even bullet pointed, right? And so having it in a flow sheet is really important. And that's one of the only ones that I know that it's, like, really tailored to what we do.
Right. And that's a little bit of a difficulty that a lot of new debaters face in planning out a case, and then particularly in recording responses to their case, is in every other class and every other experience, we're used to writing from top left to top right, top to bottom, like the whole page, right? And that's one of the first habits that has to be broken in a new debater, is like writing columns. And it seems like Debategraph, you can color code and organize in kind of a linear fashion in a progressing, way. So I think that's useful for sure. What it
doesn't do is it doesn't help you find the information. It helps you organize it after you found it, right?
Sure.
but you got something that it looks like helps you find information quick. Am I right about that? Tell us about Extemfire.
Yeah, so I built it. It was just kind of like a little pet project that I finally, at recommendation, I think of actually Danny Cantrell, made into a Chrome extension. So it's a tool to find a ton of research really fast, just by typing in whatever keyword. But what the problem that I found was when doing research is you go to BBC and you go to CNN and you go to Politico and you go to, all these sources for extemporary. You have to have, 10 sources in a 30-minute time frame for a, speech. But in parliamentary debate, it's the same kind of thing. So in this tool, you can choose, like I've got like 15 news sources with just checkboxes. So you can search whatever your keyword happens to be. So if it's immigration policy, sure, just type in that. Or if it's some particular bill, you can, Medicare Part D, you can just type that in and it'll search it for whichever news sources you have checked. It's a really simple tool, but it just pulls up all of those tabs at once. So you can very quickly fire through every news source to be able to get all the information you need in one search. So I know that theoretically you can just type it into Google and that pulls up different stuff, but I found that was never quite as effective at getting lots of credible news sources at once. Like you have a couple top news sources and then it starts to immediately get kind of spammy. So this is a way that you can get some really broad information quickly.
Yeah, and so getting and for limited preparation, like the current event stuff is just key.
Sure.
It's not always like the sort of academic peer-reviewed journal type of sources that you're looking for. Even if you can access them within that 15 minutes, the topics are usually like, ripped from the headlines type of stuff. And so it hasn't really made its rounds through peer-reviewed publications. And so, like all these current event things, like being able to sort of curate your own sources in a really short amount of time is important. Really
right.
important.
And I think any bigger topic, yeah, you definitely need some deeper, research and journal-based evidence. But when you're just given, like, if you just need to blip out your background, right, and given like the judge some context, you don't want a like a dissertation or a book that explains how it functions. You could just, want to throw out like, here's a couple of sources that explain this is the thing. Like NPR in this state said that there's this many people displaced. Thus, this is the refugee crisis. And now here's how we solve it. You got to just have a couple sources to get that out. Or, even if sometimes you get topics that you really don't know, like what is going on with Venezuelan elections. And like, if you have to come up with a plan, those are sometimes the hardest, but in other ways can be the most fun debate rounds. Is like, if you don't really know the subject, but like, hey, it's the topic, you got to figure it out anyways. You've got to do some quick research. And that just happens sometimes. You get a really specific topic. So I made that Chrome extension. People can install it for free and just play around with it. I like enjoy getting to test different stuff. So send me your feedback on it. But I like that it's a cool way for students also just to be able to use that in, a pinch. Like you can just search a bunch of different stuff and it'll open everything that you need. One caveat that I should actually make to it that we didn't explain to one of our new students that like joined his first time for Danny's online tournament, like the first one that he built when everything shut down, the first synchronous online. And that is, as soon as the round starts, sure, maybe you're allowed to use Google. Sure, you can maybe use the internet. You still can't use your coaches. That I think is going to be forever. Against the rules. You cannot keep instant messaging your coaches once the round has started. And we just like assumed we never knew that would be a problem until it happened. And we're like, oh, wait, isn't he in round? And he's like, oh yeah, so they said this and this and this. And we're like, all right, just don't respond back and we'll tell him afterwards, no messaging. So that's probably something that is easily glossed over, but a reminder to coaches, just tell your students you can't keep talking to the coaches after the round starts. But I mean, for really quick research, I think there are some useful tools out there to just pull up information quickly that can support an argument. So I think it's going to be a kind of a cool new way that we see synchronous live tournaments happening. So what about research and prep for asynchronous, right? Like you can have limited prep style debates that are now happening in an asynchronous environment. So it's like you've basically turned Parley into policy or into, LD or something different. That's going to be fascinating. So like the quality of Parley evidence can be amazing.
So like we got our fall tournament coming up. The registration is open now on forensicstournament.net. And the way that we're doing debate is that each speech has several days for people to prepare, record, upload before you move on to the next one. Technically, there is no prohibition, and we're very well aware of this. There's no prohibition against like contacting your coach in between speeches. And so if you're contacting them in between speeches, they might be able to tailor their coaching specifically to the arguments that you need to respond to, not just the ones that might come up, the ones that actually do. You could show them I think that I want to see how that turns out. I think that would be a good thing. You know what I mean? As long as the rules are even for everybody. I like the idea of not feeling like you're blindsided by stuff and being able to reference experts, and then experts are able to give you advice, but they're not able to speak for you. You know what I mean? And not only that, but coaches have a limited amount of time too. All right. Like, you think that coaches are going to sit down with one debater and just work out each of their speeches, for 4 or 5 hours. I'm like, no way am I doing that. When
every debater has 6 rounds happening simultaneously. Like I
got 8 debates, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to in 4 days, I'm going to set aside 12 hours to put, for every, no, I've already debated. I've already got my medals. Okay. So I'll give you some feedback and everything like that, but my time is valuable. All right.
I think that'll be a unique one. Like, I think that there's certainly a drawback to the amount of coach intervention in limited prep debate stuff like that. Like in prep time and feedback stuff, I think that there is some downside because it's useful that the debater does the debating. But like you say, it's not possible for the coach to do all of it when you're just discussing limited prep, especially the way that this is formatted with multiple rounds happening simultaneously. But I think especially for new students that are really hesitant to get going, they don't know where to start. One of the big drawbacks to synchronous tournaments is unless you get the ballots or the student took diligent notes that the judge gave them as feedback, you don't really know what happened in a round. And now you're going to have reviewable play-by-play footage, right? This is what professional teams, athletes, do after every game and before every new game is let's review some footage and go over what went well and what didn't go well. What phenomenal teaching tools. So I think that kind of prep time is going to be unique and different. So you've got all the way from the really crunched down 2 to 3 minutes of extended prep time during the round for, traditional synchronous events, all the way to asynchronous that is, days between each one. So I'm interested to see what online does. Obviously, this is not an ideal format, but I think that it's a cool new experimental testing ground.
Yeah. We are coming up on our time. I wanted to take the last couple of minutes to mention again that we are putting together an internship for this tournament, but also for other projects that we're doing right now. We think that the online tournament environment is interesting and people deserve to learn about it with hands-on learning experience. And that's exactly what our internship does. You could go to this link right here. I posted it up in the comments, and we would love to have a nice, robust field of applicants. We are committed to taking on one intern, but if we get a nice draw to our fall tournament, then we will take on more for sure. Spread the wealth around for absolutely sure. All right. I think that kind of wraps up what we're prep time online, but debate in general. The pandemic that we're talking about. I think it's really interesting. One last thing I was thinking is what if somebody's just kind of curating one of these maps, on Debategraph?
Yeah.
They're just working on it. They're not necessarily sending a message to a particular debater. But if you update it during a round and somebody looks it up during a round, or multiple people look it up during a round, does that break those rules on coaching during a round? You know what I mean? It's it was inadvertent. It's all I was doing was updating the page. You know what I mean? It's it just happened to be when they were checking it out.
I mean, anyone can cheat if they're clever enough for it, or if they were going to force it, right? But I think that it also comes down to the judges at some point to just want to turn off the computer or kick back and go grab some more coffee and not like sit there diligently watching each debater to like send them arguments. Like eventually you got to trust your debaters are pretty good. You've got them to where they are. Let them run with it. So like if you're a good ethical coach, just let the debater debate. And if they lose, they lose. They'll probably learn more from it.
All right. Well, I'd like to hear what anyone else has to say about like how prep time has changed for debates, how coaching has changed. We talked about coaching a little bit before, but it really overlaps with this one. Leave us some comments.
Tools and things that you use, some ways that you found to be effective for prep time. Because I think we're all going to be testing this, and I think that would be cool to come up with some new standards that are useful.
All right. Hey, everybody, that's our time. Catch us next Wednesday. We'll be talking about some more debate-related stuff. We got Tim Seavey from San Diego State University. I am Jared Kubika Miller, and I'm your debate coach, professor of communications. We are DebateSensei. So hopefully Matt will be able to join us next time, but we'll see. Okay.
Have a good one.
All right,
Thanks.
everyone. I'll see you next week. And the